going to see if you're as weird of a person as I am today. You're probably not, but that's okay. So there's a question that we're going to play out throughout the day, and I want you to roll it over in your mind. Who am I? Now, I don't know if you're like me. Like I said, this is where you're going to figure out how weird I am. There have been times in my life where have you ever stood in your bathroom mirror and just really looked at yourself? Not putting on your makeup, not doing your hair, not shaving your face, and really stared into your own eyes and asked, who am I? I said, maybe I'm the only weird one that's ever had that kind of existential crisis. But every now and then I like to do that. I catch myself looking at because most of the time when we go to things like a mirror, we're in a hurry, we're trying to get ourselves ready. But then there are times where we begin to reflect. And like, a couple weeks ago, I noticed that, man, my hair is getting gray. I don't look the same as I remember myself. Because, let's be honest, we don't really look at ourselves all that often with those kind of things in mind. And you begin to think about, approaching a certain age. And you just kind of pause for a moment and you look and you say, who am I? Now, I ponder this question a lot. And I know that may make me a strange soul. But if you think about it, when we ask ourselves that question, who am I? It's what sets humanity apart from the rest of creation. I make a lot of jokes about my cats. And if reincarnation is a real thing, I would love to come back as my house cat Max, not Odie. Odie, he does have some issues, anxiety problems. But Max, I am pretty sure that cat has never had, if you've ever been to my house, you know this cat. He's the one that's all full of himself. He does what he wants. He sleeps where he wants. He eats when he wants. I'm sure Max has never had an existential crisis of identity. He's never looked at the mirror and said, who are you, Max the cat? He exists to eat, chase stuff in the yard, and sleep on his bed. And if there's stuff on his bed, then he gets mad at you. Now, occasionally, he does require a little human contact, and then he goes off on his way. A couple of minutes of petting, and then as I use my Max voice, it's like, okay, I'm done with you, human. Now I'll go back to my life. Max is very content with himself. I'm pretty sure he has never pondered the deep mysteries of the cosmos. And I must confess, I envy him sometimes. Now, if you're like me and you have pondered this question of who am I, you begin the soul-searching process by looking at the roles you've taken on in this life, or the roles that have been given to you. And most of the time, we're pretty content with defining ourselves this way. We describe ourselves by the things that we do, who we are in relation to other people, the jobs that we have. The response goes something like this. I am Marcus Hutto, and that is the name that is ascribed to all the experiences that make up my life. I'm a follower of Jesus. I am a husband to Amy. I am a pastor of Project Restoration. I am a parent to Blair and Ben. I'm an occupational therapist by trade, and my job gives me immense satisfaction. Now, you may have never thought through your answers in any detail like this. I only did it today because of the sermon. But in reality, if you ever introduce yourself to somebody who is a stranger, how do you introduce yourself? It's always by those things that you have in common, those roles that you have. Men, we talk about, one of the first questions when men introduce each other, well, what do you do? About talking about your children, or if you're a grandparent, your grandchildren. I know that absorbs a lot of you grandparents' conversations. No. And I'm not saying that those are necessarily bad things. That's just where we find meaning in our day-to-day life. But every now and then something happens. And it happens to us, and it punches a hole in this carefully constructed framework. Because no matter how permanent we see these roles that we have adopted, they're actually only temporary. Our life is constantly in flux, whether we want to admit it or not. And the things that we thought we could count on to give us meaning for the rest of our days evaporate. We can feel distant from God. Jobs get lost. Marriages fall apart. Churches close. People grow up or leave us. It is in these moments when our world is completely deconstructed that the question of who am I takes on a new, and let's face it, sometimes ominous posture. When we are deprived of the roles and relationships that we have found meaning in, the question moves deeper into our soul and lengthens into something like this. With everything around me gone, now who am I? This is the question that the book of Job in the Old Testament is built around. When everything I have ever known is taken away, what kind of person am I? Now, most of the time, we only face this level of question in the crucible of loss. It's a forced question because, let's face it, we don't really want to go there in our day-to-day lives. But if we're truly to understand what this life is about and the nature of all things, then we have to face it. Because for those of us who have faith, it strikes at the very heart of existence. In the grand scheme of this whole universe, who am I really? Now, for those of you that have just joined us this week, we're preaching through a series called I Am This Kind of Christian. And I started it because rather than define ourselves in the negative on how we're different than other Christians, I'm making a conscious choice to say what we believe positively. We started the journey 2 weeks ago about believing that something created everything. We moved last week into the nature of this Creator, that this God is both good and worthy of trust, and we humans kind of stand at the top of that creation. But what does that even mean? When we see all that has been made, we have to ask ourselves, what is my role? What is my place here in this creation? Now, the beautiful thing about this is that we are not alone in this question. Ordinary people have pondered it from the beginning of recorded history. Every major culture has had to grapple with the question, what does it mean to be human? The writers found in the Bible were no exception. And every new generation had to figure out how they fit into this unfolding story of God. Who are we? And why does God care so much about us? Now, if you remember back to the Psalms that I read during the reading today in the service, there were a couple of verses that asked such a question. Verses 3 and 4. Remember, when I consider the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set into place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. Now I can picture it. The ancient songwriter is staring up into a night sky with absolutely no light pollution, seeing all that he can, marveling at the sheer size of creation, and he's overwhelmed by the scale of it all. Now keep in mind, this writer still considered the world flat, and the sky above was a dome. What would he think now, knowing that the universe is so much more vast than even he could imagine? Man is so much smaller in the grand scheme of things. And yet, God is still mindful. The psalmist goes on to place humans a little lower than the angels and crowned with glory and honor, giving us dominion over all creation. So it's here that we find our primary identity, our collective identity as humanity. We were created by this being who is good, to be loved by him. Even in the vastness of all creation, this God, he pays special attention to these humans. I can't state this enough. All human beings are loved and valued by God, period. In Genesis 1:27, which I quote frequently, humans were given the divine image of God, and too often we humans seek every way possible to devalue the other or even the image within ourselves. We seek to deny their humanity, their image of God. No matter what we do, though, we can't do it. I deny the image of God in others. And therein, I think, lies the problem. Even though the image of God is present in all of us, I find myself doing my best to deny it within myself and others. But that is still the primary identity. And if the church, if I could change the message of the church today, it is that all of creation, all of humanity are loved and valued by God. I am loved. You are loved. But herein lies the tension. You see, I know that I am loved by God. I know that the Bible tells me that, and I can feel God's presence in my life. But there are also ways and things that I do, and I fail to live up to that identity. I know that I'm loved. I know that I'm valued. I know that you're loved and that you're valued. But I also know that I don't feel it all the time. And in fact, there are things that I do that deny this very root of identity. This even, it'll manifest itself in the ways that I identify myself. While I like to say that I'm a follower of Jesus, I often fail to follow through on the basic things that Jesus tells us to do. I say I'm the husband of Amy. I also recognize that I often fail to live up to my own expectations of what a husband should be. As a parent, we really don't even want to go there. But I can be just as short and as sometimes angry with my own kids, not giving them the time they need. And as a pastor, there are days that I know I say and I don't do the right things in delicate situations, or I've failed to adequately prepare for a sermon. And the list goes on. I know my identity. I know who I am. But at the same time, I fail. And that is frustrating. Paul gave voice to this frustration in Romans 20:15. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate to do, I do. There is a disconnect between the truth that I know deep down in my soul and how I act. There is a word we can use to describe this disconnection. Sin. Now, at this point in the sermon, most sermons, the pastor is going to launch into a lengthy guilt trip about certain types of sin and blame this sin for all of the ills of the world. Here's the thing, people. You don't need to tell me. You don't need me to tell you all the ways that you're broken. I don't need to jump into specific sins, because if I'm being truly honest, if I'm going to preach about the sins, all the sins, I'm not going to preach on mine. But like the earlier part of the sermon, where we dig past the superficial definitions of who we are, the specific natures of sins, that's just the symptom. When we strip away the specific acts of sin, I've developed 3 statements that I think define and that we can work with these things. And we all can agree on this. Number 1, sin is failing to recognize the divine image in all creation. Now, this includes myself and other people. When I seek to make the other person less than human, when I seek to try to take advantage of them, that is sin. 2, sin is failing to love. And I don't mean all the ways that the world defines love, but in the ways that we as a church have talked about it. Really, truly loving in all the ways that Jesus defined it. And lastly, sin is making ourselves God and making God into a being who serves our own twisted purposes. If I could boil down all sin in the world, those are the 3 things I think that I see when I see all the ways that we do wrong and we fail to live up to the image that we know that's inside of us. So if I were to sum up what it means to be a human in this universe, it would go something like this. I believe that at the core of every person on the planet resides the image of God. A divine stamp that signifies that this person is valuable and is loved by God. Now, I also believe that because of this image, we're given a choice. Each day, each second, to acknowledge that divine image within ourselves and others, or to reject it. And we humans, we live in that tension of recognizing that we are created in the image of God, a little lower than the angels. And we also have this nature that fights against the image. So what do we do? Since the beginning of time, we've developed coping strategies to deal with this disconnect. We can blame God, asking, why, if you wanted us to be like you, why did you make us with all of these impulses, drives, and the choice to have an independent life from you? Shortened it looks something like this. If you wanted me, God, to be like you, then why did you make me like me? And I know I've asked that question of God a lot, but here's the thing I've discovered. This is not a question that the Bible has an answer to. I know that's shocking, right? That the Bible doesn't answer every question that we have. But it doesn't. And there are a lot of theories out there using different passages of the Bible, and each of these theories are equally valid. But the truth is that this is not a question that the Bible directly answers. In fact, the one person, Job, one of my favorite people in the Old Testament, who dared to ponder this question, didn't even get an answer. Read the end of the book of Job, but I warn you, it will leave you with more questions than answers, and it will leave you a bit unsettled. So what does the Bible do then? Rather than answer the specific question of why, the writers of the Bible were more concerned with how. Specifically, how do I deal with this tension between the person that I am and the person that I want to be? I recognize that there is a disconnect between who I am and who I want to be. Please, God, how do we overcome it? That's the question that the Bible ponders. Again, there is no quick or easy answer, but it begins as a simple invitation that has its root even in the Old Testament. God says, "Come to me. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost." Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me, eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me. Listen that you may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promised to David. See, I have made him a witness to the peoples, a ruler and a commander of the peoples. Surely you will summon nations you know not, and nations you do not know will come running to you, because the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has endowed you with splendor. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their ways, and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will freely pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. This passage isn't talking about actual food and drink, but an invitation to life with God, a satisfying life, a life that costs you nothing. Come by, even though you have no money. There is no cost to you. I mean, I would love to do that in a grocery store. Just walk out with my cart. God says he's paid for it. Why do you waste your life on pursuits that give you no hope, no true joy, no fulfillment? This table is set for you. Now, I love this passage because it begins with an invitation. Come, all you who are thirsty. And ends with a command. Seek the Lord while he may be found. It costs you nothing to come, but you have to look for it. You're not going to trip over God and discover them. You have to make an effort to look for him. Let everyone who has tried it on their own give up their old way of life and their old thoughts. Now, this invitation of come is issued all throughout the Bible. Jesus echoes this invitation in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 11. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythm of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. You see, I love this invitation because it isn't to come, all of you who have life figured out. Come to all of you who are sure of everything, who have great certainty about all that is and all that ever will be. Those were the religious people of Jesus' day, by the way. He never issued the invitation to them because to them they had it all figured out. He issued the invitation to people who were confused, confounded, perplexed, and let's face it, just plain broke. If you are at that place, if you are asking, who am I? My prayer is that you come to see yourself as the dearly loved creation of God. The purpose of the church is to help you on this journey and to see the divine image that is within you and others. We want to help in the struggle against the denial of that image in yourself and others. We want to help with that sin. We want to help you to see that God has created it all and wants you to live a life that is transformed by His love. As we stand and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I love you so much, and I thank you for this church and this chance to grapple with these deep questions that really do matter. And when we ask ourselves, who are we, or who am I? May the first image I would pray that pops into people's heads is that they would understand that they are loved and created by you. And that they would know what that truly means, and that you have a purpose for their lives, God. But I would also pray that as we look deeply within ourselves, we would see all the ways that we fail to live up to that love. And not just give in to the fact that we have this guilt about it, God, but that we realize that this is what it means to be human, and that you love us in spite of the things that we do. And we live in this tension of the person we are and the person we want to be. And that you give us this invitation into this life with you. And my prayer is that if anyone here is lacking that life with you, that they would come to know it today. Amen.